Reading 33 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll. Quaramid, Ugle, June 1st, 1946. Commentary on Memory. People so often not only try to explain themselves by their past, but feel themselves only by it. What do we mean by our past? What we call our past may be only one explanation of our present, and a very inadequate one. What we call our past is our memory of it, but what we call our memory does not explain either the past or the present. Our memory is according to our level of being. Our personal memory is so often a false, distorted thing. The point is that we remember very little, let us say 100,000,000th part of all that happened. I often doubt if we ever can remember anything as it actually was. Our memory depends on our powers of reception, and is by no means objective. Do you remember, for instance, all that happened outside and inside you in the external world, and in your mind even yesterday, or last week, or last year? Of course you do not. You remember scarcely anything of the sum total. Please do not pretend you do. But some pride themselves on having a very good, faultless memory, and even say so. Another person remembers differently. So there is a quarrel, a very tedious kind of quarrel. Now, what memory we have connects things in its own subjective way. But do you suppose that this thin, subjective memory really connects things aright? Can you really see your life through your memory? It is true to say that the past must exist for the present moment to exist. But what is your present moment that your past so often creates for you? Is it a real one, or an invention of the past? What is the thing you cling to called memory of the past? I do not think it is reliable. Can you remember what you did as well as the other person? You remember what he or she did. Is your so-called memory anything you can really trust? From my own experience in this work, I would say at once that it is the most unreliable guide to follow, and that one has practically to cancel it. Our memories are private liars that we carry about carefully. Do not think that to remember yourself is to remember your past. To proceed into the future with this false memory is not any solution to one's life. I would say, rather, forget, overcome your past. It is all so much nonsense to imagine we have infallible memory. Oh, this memory that folk cling to and hug in an ecstasy of unhappiness. The realization that what we call our past, that is, what we believe that we remember as our past, is not something to base our present moment on, is a step in awakening. Otherwise we continue to sit in a darkness of our own making, a darkness made by our subjective ideas of our past, which we say is real memory. We have no real, unchallengeable memory. Yet the work says we have a real memory, only it is not accessible to us at the ordinary levels of consciousness. Everything is recorded. Everything we saw, everything we did and said, everything we felt and thought is there, on rolls, in centers, and in their subdivisions. But our access to this real memory is, mercifully for us as we are, concealed from us. The action of uncritical, observing eye begins to restore in a small part real memory, but only to the extent that a person can stand it without going completely mad. We have a system of buffers, to mention one factor, that prevents us from being conscious in real interior memory. Real interior memory is opened at death. It is called a book in the New Testament. If your imagination of yourself, your false notions of yourself, your false personality with its invented notions of what you are, if all this has, in this life, been to some extent separated from, not identified with, and so seen through, then perhaps one might bear a little this opening of the book, which is described in Revelation in the following words. Quote, "And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of the things which were written in the books, according to their works." Revelation 20. This means that at death we become conscious in the fourth dimension. That is, all the life becomes conscious to us. And then we see what really happened. Why 2 books? That is indeed a question to think about. In that interesting Persian esoteric story called The Conference of the Birds, the same idea appears. The birds had at last, after losing all their feathers, reached the presence of the sovereign. But it is said, first of all, a register was placed before them in which every detail of the deeds that each one of them had done or omitted to do, from the beginning to the end, was carefully entered. Let us speak about memory from what the work teaches. Every center has its own memory, and every part of a center has its own memory. The qualities of these memories are different. We have not, in short, 1 memory, but first of all 3 memories, then 9 memories, and then 27 memories. This is because taking 3 centers, intellectual, emotional, and instinct moving center, each has its own memory. Then dividing each of these 3 centers into 3 parts, we have 9 smaller memories. Again, each of these subdivisions is again divided into 3, so that we have 3 plus 9 plus 27 memories. That is 39 different sorts of memory on different scales. On these 39 memories, everything we have seen, said, thought, felt, and sensed is recorded. But our access to these 39 memories is very slight. We live, as a rule, in 1 or 2 very small subdivisions of centers. Let me add that even this category of memories is incomplete. The negative divisions of centers have been left out. If we divide the intellectual and emotional centers each by a cross line into 2 parts, the lower part being the negative side, then you can calculate for yourselves that we have another 24 memories. Now, in speaking about different memories in us, let us take something that we can easily grasp. Intellectual memory is different from emotional memory. And again, the memory of moving center is different from intellectual memory and emotional memory. We must conceive very large things here, up which we crawl as small insects. A man may have learnt to ride a bicycle. That is, his moving center remembers, but he cannot remember what he once knew of chemistry. When he gets on a bicycle, he finds soon that he can ride it. Something remembers. What remembers? His intellectual center? Certainly not. He taps another memory, more easily accessible to him. But he cannot remember some chemical formula, so he will have to look it up. Yet he finds he takes it all in more quickly than a man who has never learnt chemistry. After a time, things come back to him and his intellectual memory revives, but only by some effort. Now let us take emotional center. A person remembers, as a rule, unpleasant, negative emotions. They revive themselves by mechanical associations very easily. This kind of memory is not the same as the memory of intellectual center or moving center. The emotional center is not under our control. That is, we cannot feel happy when we are unhappy. There are certain efforts possible here, but I speak of ourselves as ordinary people. An effort in connection with intellectual center can change the direction of thought, and one can recall something by concentration or by looking it up. But the memory of emotional center, which means so often the memory of the negative part of emotional center, is not altered so easily. One reason is because we have such long strings of unpleasant memories harbored there that we take as real, as actual, and in fact as our past. When you think a thing is real, is actual, naturally you cannot alter it. So it is difficult to alter the memories belonging to the negative part of emotional center. But once we begin to doubt their truthfulness, once we begin to suspect they are not wholly correct, then of course it is possible to separate from them. This is a fortunate moment. One, so to speak, discards the past as one imagined it to be, and steps right into the present with a certain delight, freedom, and I need not be like this. One has always this feeling of delight when one gets free from one of the many chains anchoring us to what we have hitherto insisted is ourselves, and defended so uselessly with the useless expenditure of energy that could go toward a new edition of oneself, a new view of oneself, a new person. These chains, however, are very powerful. Only the intake of the work, only the breathing in of another set of influences can begin to dissolve them. For no one can free himself from what he is unless he feels the existence of what is higher than he is and begins to obey it. But people easily object to this idea, namely that there is anything higher than themselves. We are set very hard and tight in ourselves. We cannot see that there is something higher in ourselves than we are ourselves, namely, higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of being and knowledge, higher levels of understanding, and so of mercy. This awareness of something higher is a critical point in a person's movement towards internal awakening, and at this point everyone who has got as far as this has to undergo a long, difficult, and yet quite simple and straightforward struggle to tilt the balance, which eventually makes the unforgiving personality passive and merciful essence active. What connection has all this with memory? It has a very real connection, because unless a person begins to have a work memory and can see himself over a period, he can never approach this point. Unless he has ceased to believe that he knows himself and is what he imagines he is and behaves as he thinks, he cannot change. Why? Because he is satisfied with his imaginary I. So he remains asleep, even if life knocks him very hard. It is never his fault, of course. He does not see that his level of being, what he is, attracts his life. And he has no real memory, no work memory gained by self-observation. He takes himself for granted. The memory he has is not real memory, but memory edited by vanity and prejudice. I repeat that of all we have done and said, of all we have seen and heard, or of all that others have done to us or said to us, of all we have thought or felt or intended or wished, of all our behavior and of all the behavior of others to us, of all this we remember 100 millionth part, and even so it is all wrongly connected. But we have a deeper memory, accessible only to a higher level of consciousness, where it is all recorded as it actually was. The formation of work memory through observing I begins to lift memory to another level. Then perhaps we will not eventually experience too disastrously the shock of being confronted with what we did or said or thought, and what we imagined we did or said or thought.